I have talked to people who got their master's degrees, and so what they did was they went back after getting like a master's degree and got their GED, just so that it could be on file.
That's hilarious. It's no secret that I think there's a lot wrong with our education system. I'm actually pretty radical in terms of what I think needs to change, but how radical is too radical? To try to find out, I'm talking to folks who grew up taking part in one of the most radical forms of education that I know of, unschooling. This is the first in a series of videos where I interview grown unschoolers to see how this radical approach to education has worked out for them. Today, we're talking to Brigid.
My name is Brigid Chasky. I am a 24-year-old college student and lifelong unschooler.
Notice how she says she's a college student and an unschooler in the same sentence, and we'll get to that, don't worry, but this does raise the question of what does it mean to be an unschooler? Like, the word unschooler kind of sounds like you're not allowed to go to school. So what boxes do you actually need to check to count as an unschooler?
To me, unschooling is more of a process than it is a list of regimented criteria. So I've actually been through many different iterations of education in my life. I've done Waldorf, I've done Montessori, I've done homeschooling where I actually got textbooks in the mail from a private school that has a brick and mortar location. And then I've also done homeschooling where my mom designed the curriculum. And then I've also done completely radical unschooling where I just followed my passions and my interests, and there was no limit put on me there. But the string that combined all those experiences for me was that I always had agency over my education and I always had autonomy. And to me, those are really the key points of unschooling. You can be in public school, in my opinion, and still be an unschooler as long as your family is facilitating your freedom, agency, and autonomy at all times.
And supporting that level of autonomy means being free to drop out of formal education entirely?
At the age of 16, I officially dropped out of any kind of official education. Sometimes I would follow more traditional like academic paths, and then sometimes I would just not do anything academic for years.
That sounds drastic. Even for folks who are cool with Montessori and DIY homeschooling. So how does a person arrive at a place where this is okay?
I had been homeschooling via a curriculum. And at 16, I started to really struggle with pretty much all of my subjects, but with math specifically. And it was funny because I had always been really good at math and I always really loved it. And then it went from school being more fun and more relaxed to, okay, now you got to get serious. And I found that very stressful and intimidating. I was like, no, learning is fun. Like, learning has always been fun. This is not what I like in life. I started to just get like F's and like D's on my math quizzes. I think that was the most stark for me because nothing else was really graded, but with like math, it's easy to grade it because it's like, how many did you get right out of how many? There's this culture surrounding education where it's kind of like there are, benchmarks and there are grades and there is reprimanding and gold stars, and it's all just kind of cut into like these little boxes that make education inherently classist, and it hurts people's ability to have confidence in themselves and have confidence in their ability to learn for the rest of their lives. So that was like really hard, and I ended up being told about this camp for unschoolers, and that was Not Back to School camp.
I looked this up, and yeah, Not Back to School camp is basically a summer camp specifically for unschoolers, although by the looks of it, you don't have to be an unschooler to go. As far as I can tell, it differs from a typical summer camp in that there's a lot less structure and fewer rules imposed by the adults.
I went to that when I was 16 after like a year and a half of struggling and not really feeling like I was meshing with school anymore. And I met a bunch of teenagers and a bunch of adults who thought like me and had similar experiences to me. It opened up this world. And I came back and I told my parents, I was like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm gonna radically unschool. And they were unfamiliar with the topic and kind of uncomfortable with it.
But her parents went along with it with some understandable hesitations. As Brigid told me, it wasn't always easy being an unschooler. Did you have anyone doubt that you were going to make it in life?
Oh, yeah. All the time. Everybody, constantly, all the time. But like, there were definitely some issues with peers growing up, just because I think being like 13 to 15 is just a horrible, horrible time of life. So I had a lot of peers like who might have been jealous of the fact that I was able to like have so much freedom, who were very critical about it instead, as a way to like project maybe their own insecurities onto me of like, well, you're gonna fail and life is hard and life sucks. I got a lot of that from adults too, where it was like, you're just being raised in a fantasy world and life isn't like that, and you're going to get into the real world and you're not going to survive. To which my response was always that misery doesn't need to be fabricated. Like, misery is just part of life. And just because I haven't experienced being punished by a teacher or getting an F, I have experienced being turned down for opportunities that I applied for. I have experienced getting my heart broken. I have experienced like having pets die. Like, I've experienced tragedy, let me tell you. I got to watch my grandmother like die of cancer. That was great. Like, you don't need to like make up cruel things. Like, life will just do it already. It's not like I live in a vacuum that is separate from the rest of the world. There were a lot of adults who were very concerned about me not having a high school diploma, especially when I went and moved out on my own. They were just like, you're going to be eaten up and spit out and fail.
Wait, back up. Did she really mean she doesn't have a high school diploma?
I didn't technically graduate high school. I don't have a diploma. I don't have a GED.
Yeah, she doesn't have a diploma now, and she didn't have one when she left home at the age of 17.
When I was 17, I moved away from where my parents live in New Mexico to Oregon, because I had a lot of friends there. And I started looking for work. And when they asked me if I had graduated high school, I just said yes. And nobody ever asked me to prove it. Like, they were just like, okay, cool. And when they asked me like where I went to school, I said I was homeschooled. And they usually thought that was really cool. And we're like, oh, so you're like self-motivated and self-disciplined and like good at talking to a variety of different people. Awesome. So I never struggled to find work, which was really cool. I've worked in food service. I've worked in childcare. I was an office administrator at a medical office. And I was also an accounting like assistant and bookkeeper at an accounting freelance office. Right now, I am pursuing my bachelor's degree in mathematics.
Okay, here we go. This is the big question. How can anyone get into college without a high school diploma?
Because I decided to go to a state university and because I decided to go to a junior college first. So the way it works is the junior college does not require a high school diploma. The four-year does, but because I did at least 30 credits at the junior college, I was counted as a transfer student. And if you are a transfer student, they don't need a diploma because you've proven that you can handle college-level coursework.
Okay, so that accounts for the lack of paperwork, but you'd expect somebody who dropped out and didn't do academics for years to be woefully underprepared for college-level work, right?
You dropped out of school with bad grades in math. Like, what happened in between?
Literally nothing. Like, I literally didn't do math for 8 years. If I had to guess, I think taking breaks for things is good. I think being able to come back to things with fresh eyes is good. The different sections of our brain are more interconnected than we really think they are. I think that mathematical thinking is not completely separate from artistic or emotional thinking. And I think I probably went through some things during those 8 years that changed pathways in my brain, and they made things make sense. And when I turned 21, I started taking classes at my local community college. They don't require you to have a high school diploma or transcripts or an SAT score or an ACT score or a GED or anything. I had to take what is called an AccuPlacer, which is essentially, it's like English and math. I aced the English part of it, even though I hadn't done formal, like textbook education in 8 years. And the math part, I got just below, like 2 points below, like college level math, which is like ridiculous. Because again, hadn't done it in 8 years and wasn't doing very well the last time I did it. they said, well, do you want to study the math a little bit and come back and retake it? Or do you want to just continue with like the remedial math course? And I was like, I'll take the remedial math course, because I'd honestly, like, I know myself and the way that I learn, another super valuable part of being given autonomy in your education. And I would rather take it slow and not be stressed out about it. So I took the remedial math, which was probably like, I don't know, high school level math. And all of a sudden, math made sense. Like, after, you know, I was getting like F's and D's when I was like 16, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, okay, like, no, this is chill. The pressure on me, like, I let go of it. And then I also feel like probably your brain goes through a lot of shifts, you know, from the age of 16 to the age of 21. And I think that my teachers are definitely to thank for my success. That first teacher, she was a woman. She has a PhD in mathematics, which is like, I always love meeting women in mathematics. And she was incredibly kind and sweet and encouraging. And I think that that helped a lot. It just all kind of worked. And because I'm an unschooler, I'm good at finding information when I need it. And I'm good at knowing how I learn. And so if there's something in the curriculum that's missing from the way I learn, I go and I find it and I fill it in when I need to.
So are you thinking what I was thinking when I first heard this? Brigid's explanation for how she got prepared for college doesn't make any sense if you're using the logic that our education system was built on. Like, those of us who went through conventional schooling believe that being ready to learn something means being caught up with the curriculum, not being behind. It means putting in the work and meeting the deadlines and checking off all the prerequisites. But Brigid readied herself for college by waiting until she was ready to start it on her own terms. A teacher's perspective is teachers usually take it upon themselves to prepare their students for whatever the next thing is. There's this idea of readiness, and that it's kind of the teacher's responsibility to get the student ready for whatever's next in the curriculum, the next year or whatever. But your story seems to go against the idea that teachers can get other people ready. Like, a teacher cannot alter the neurochemistry of whatever's in the brain, the pathways, to make someone ready to learn math. It sounds like it doesn't work that way, at least not for you.
Different people have different brains, and sometimes you're ready for information and sometimes you're not. You can't make someone ready for something. They have to be ready for something.
You know what they say, you can lead a horse to water, but if it doesn't drink, then you should give it a bad grade, and also maybe make its parents and teachers feel like they did something wrong. Really, why do we feel like it's normal to expect kids to alter their understanding of the universe on a strict schedule? It's like we're coming at this more out of a desire to control people than out of any understanding of what people actually need to be able to fulfill their potential. Brigid made an analogy to the way we've come to think about helping people with addiction.
Like, you think about, you know, I have a lot of experience with addiction in my family. You can't force anybody to get help. They have to want to get help, and they have to be ready for that, to accept that help. And I think that applies to a lot of different things in life.
We've mostly come around to a public health model of addiction, and it makes me wonder what a public health model of education might look like. But okay, before we get ahead of ourselves, it's worth asking, was Brigid's positive experience getting into college just a fluke? It sure sounds like it could be. You do not have a high school diploma.
I do not.
And yet you are on track to graduate with a degree in math from a four-year university.
Mm-hmm.
That will blow a lot of people's minds. Is that like a big outlier and no one should try to do that? Or is that kind of a common thing that can happen?
So, to my knowledge, it's definitely common. It definitely, like, in the unschooling community, obviously. Yeah. Being unschooled is not common. But that's the thing. I have talked to people who got their master's degrees and then had a job that was, like, for the government, I think, and specifically required that they have a diploma on file. And so what they did was they went back after getting, like, a master's degree and got their GED, just so that it could be on file.
That's hilarious.
Like, you may run into jobs where they do require it, and then, you know, you're an unschooler. You'll figure it out. Like, yeah. You'll find the resources that you need and you'll figure it out. The other thing is, like, it depends on state it depends on the college where you decide to go to school. So there's like these like little kind of ways that you can get in. But like if you wanted to apply to like Yale, you're probably going to have to prove like I have a transcript and I have a diploma and I have an SAT score. So it kind of depends on your trajectory and what you want to do. So it's just, you just kind of have to do research in your area and figure out what's best for you.
So it sounds like there's a lot of little intricacies, but it is doable.
It's possible, yes.
And that's something I think young people do not hear. It's you have to graduate, you have to get your diploma, you have to go to college, otherwise your life is in shambles.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't seem to be true.
No, it's not true.
Okay, so this unschooling thing can work, and it sounds like it works out often enough that it's not just a happy accident when it does, but it's got to be really hard to take a different path. We already heard about all the flack that Brigid got from other people. I was curious, does she still feel like it was worth it? Was it too hard?
The benefits have always outweighed the negatives for me, and it's always felt right. So, no, it wasn't hard.
Well, let's hear about some of those benefits.
I wasn't in school, so it was like I could do a lot of things that were during the day that my school compatriots couldn't do. One of the most important things I think I started doing as a teenager was I started volunteering at my local biopark. They're a public nonprofit. There's the zoo, there's the botanical gardens, there's the aquarium, and I started volunteering there, and that was so cool because I was able to, engage directly with the public. Again, like people who are 4, people who are 84 come to the biopark. I got to learn a lot about plants and about animals. I got to start learning scientific classification and Latin names. And I got to participate in actively educating the public about conservation and climate change and how important all this stuff is and how important biodiversity is and ecology is. And I started doing that when I was 16. The other cool thing I feel like unschooling allowed me to do is that I didn't have to learn on a fixed schedule. So I didn't necessarily have weekends and summers off like a lot of my friends did. I didn't really like taking full summers off because I liked to learn. And that's transferred to college where I don't take summers off. I take summer classes and everybody is just acting like I'm insane. And why would you want to do that? I took 2 math classes over the summer and everyone was including my advisor was what is wrong with you? And I was I like math. I don't know. And it's worked out well for me. And because of it, even though I allowed myself to start going to school very slowly and gradually, I am on track to graduate in that 4-year period because I just don't ever stop taking classes.
Did unschooling allow you to follow your passions?
Yeah, I think that's a definitive yes. I was in a pre-professional dance program for 3 years. I got to dance all the time. I got to travel more than I might have otherwise. I got to travel alone several times actually, or with people who are not my parents, which I think was huge. I got to travel across the country at the age of 13 with my uncle. And even though I'm with someone who obviously cares for me, it's a very different dynamic with him than it is with one of my parents. And he did put me on a couple trains and buses by myself while he had to go do something else. And the amount that you will learn about yourself when you are traveling alone it's very important, I think. I got to learn how to fix things and build things. I got to learn how to do woodworking. I feel I learned how to take care of myself, how to cook and clean up after myself at a very young age, and how to get enough sleep, and how to recognize when I'm stressed out or angry or sad, and how do I cope with those things, and how do I come out the other side. I guess maybe that's not a passion, but I feel that's a part of being alive, which is kind of a passion, that I think I was allowed to pursue wholeheartedly in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise.
A lot of kids only like school, conventional schooling, because they get to see their friends.
Basically.
So how did being homeschooled and unschooled affect your social life?
I think the most positive thing is that I got to hang out with people that were not just my age. I think that was amazing. I would say that the vast majority of my friends were a year younger or a year older than me. I even had a pair of best friends when I was 8 who were 4. I also feel I was able to develop relationships based on more pertinent shared experience than I think a lot of people do in school, because I feel like a lot of the time when you're in school, you're there because you're the same age and you live in the same district, and that's about it. And for me, it was like we had so much more in common, like culturally, than I would have if I was just in school. And we got to like bond over more experiences than maybe just like eating lunch together or being in a math class together. We got to bond over like traveling together and raising our younger siblings together and like doing chores together. Like, you'd be surprised how like phenomenally fun and bonding it can be to like wash your mom's car together. So I don't feel like my social life was hurt at all.
So this idea that leaving school would necessarily involve losing all your friends and becoming completely isolated, not true.
No. I also had really close relationships with older adults. I guess that's a bit of a hot button topic. It can be problematic, but I think what was really important is that my parents always knew them and like were also friends with them. So it wasn't just like strange adults that I was like going off with. That was something that was so valuable to me growing up, is not seeing adults as authoritarian or scary, but actually as resources to help me. And I had a lot of wonderful adults in my life that helped me in areas that maybe my parents weren't as great in, because we all have our gaps, right? I was never afraid of adults, and I think that's huge. And that's definitely something that a lot of adults commented on when I was growing up, where they were like, wow, if I had the time, I would homeschool my kid because she's so much more comfortable talking to adults than any child I've ever met.
That kind of brings us to the elephant in the room when it comes to unschooling and even homeschooling more broadly. The thing is, not everyone can do it. It worked for Brigid, and it may work for a lot of individual families who have the resources for it, but it's not a solution to the problems with our education system. Do you have any opinions on what a better educational system for everyone might look like? I
have very little experience with public school. I had friends who went and they told me about their experiences. And then I have had adults in my life who were teachers, and they also told me about their experiences. From what I gathered from them and from my friends is that it wasn't good. And I was like very fortunate to not be in it. So I grew up definitely being aware that people were disenchanted with it, including people who were heavily invested in trying to make it work. Access to public education is an amazing thing. I recognize that as someone who is going to a public university, went to a public junior college, and is now going to a public four-year college, but also as someone who have lots of people that I love in my life who are product of these universities and schools, middle schools, high schools. You know, I come from a very privileged background where like all of my grandparents are college educated, my parents are college educated, my uncles are college educated, like everybody in my family has at least an undergraduate degree. I just don't know enough to have like authority to be like, this is how it should work. For some people, it might be their only outlet. Maybe they don't have a great home life. Maybe they're first generation and their parents don't speak English. Maybe this is where they get most of their food. There is definitely a place in our society for public education. And at its heart, public education is an incredible, amazing thing. And I want it to exist and I want it to be good. I think that one of our biggest issues with education is not necessarily education. It's how we see and treat children. I think that children should be thought of and like classified as marginalized. They are constantly expected to sit down and shut up and to hold their opinions and hold their feelings inside in a way that we do not expect adults to do. They're expected to share any resources they have, like forcibly without consent. You're like a rude, bratty child if you don't want to share your toys at that time. Like there's just so many things that we do and say around kids that is just so unhelpful and unempowering. And I feel like education is doomed to fail if you don't respect the people you're trying to educate.
I do think there's a lot of disrespect for kids built into our education system. But I also appreciate the fact that Brigid probably would have had a much more difficult time making it as an unschooler if not for the various privileges that she and her family have been afforded. Now, that's far from a ringing endorsement of society's prevailing notions about kids and about school, and I have my own ideas about how the philosophy behind unschooling can help public education, but we'll leave that for another video. For now, let's get back to Brigid and unschooling. And I think there's some final takeaways here that might apply to everyone.
Do you have any advice for students or parents who might be thinking about homeschooling or unschooling?
Yeah, so I think that the most important thing that you can possibly do is to model what you think is important to your kids, because there's that old adage of children don't do what you tell them, they do what you do. Your children are going to copy you, and they're going to learn so much from just watching you. So don't be stressed out about them being good at a certain thing or liking a certain thing or progressing at a certain pace. Because if you love learning, like say you love literature, they will see that, and they will at least, even if literature doesn't end up being their thing, they will always have an appreciation for it, and they will always associate it with you and with positive things if you approach it in a positive way instead of it being this is required for you to function as a person, because it probably isn't. Pretty much anything that you see as being extremely important and non-negotiable is probably more of a you thing than it is like a them thing, and trying to unlearn that is hard, but it's important. The one thing that I would go back and change, maybe, because you have to think that everything that's happened has brought you to where you are, is to not put as much pressure on myself or to accept as much pressure from other people as I did. There were so many things that I was freaked out about and that people like freaked me out about. As much as like I ignored them and I stayed on my path, having enough people tell you that you're going to fail, definitely you internalize that. And I shouldn't have. And it's funny, I think that because I was unschooled and because I was allowed to be unschooled, people kind of assume like that my relationship with my parents was like perfect, and that they were always supportive. It was not. That is not the case. They were definitely the source of a lot of criticism when I was growing up too, that I wasn't doing enough, that I wasn't enough of like a model homeschooler. I think there's a lot of pressure on you if you are a homeschooler and an unschooler to kind of be a model, and to represent everybody and to be like going to an Ivy League at 16 or like own your own company. Like I had friends that were like that, where they were like, oh yes, like I turned down Yale and like I build guitars for a living. And they're great and I love them, but I wasn't always like that. There were like many times in my life where all I did was watch TV or play video games and go on walks. And I definitely got flack for that from adults in my life, especially when you're young. It feels huge. Being unschooled or homeschooled like defines you as a person. It's huge. It's your whole, like it's your community. Every adult asks you what grade you're in and you just stand there like kind of blinking and you're like, I don't even know. And then you have to like explain to them your whole life story. And then you get to like be showered in their judgment. And then you become an adult and all of a sudden nobody cares and nobody asks. I have never in my adult life felt out of place or like I had a knowledge gap or like I couldn't relate to most of the experiences that like my peers have experienced. Like they've never been talking about like a book or something where I didn't also know the book. And everybody just asks me where I work or where I go to college now. And no one cares that I was homeschooled or unschooled, to the point where I would say a lot of people who meet me who've only known me in my adult years don't know. So I think that's another thing to kind of consider about this, is that it is this huge thing when you're a kid and then everything kind of calms down and you're like, oh, like this wasn't like either way, like we're going to survive our childhood. It really is going to be okay. And life is not as like tricky and like out to get you as people make it out to be.
So there you have it. Thank you so much for watching, and thanks to Brigid for taking the time to talk to me. Also, special thanks to Maya Landers for creating grownunschoolers.com, the website where I found Brigid. You can read more about Brigid and a bunch of other grown unschoolers at grownunschoolers.com. I'll leave a link in the description. As I mentioned at the beginning, this video is part of a series where I interview grown unschoolers to see how it worked out for them. If you want to be notified when the next video comes out, I'm sure YouTube has a way that you can set that up. You can probably figure it out, right?
My little brother, now he's totally unschooled, by the way. He's gotten to be unschooled for pretty much his whole life because my parents were like, oh, it worked. Like, she was right. He's 10 years younger than me, so like I got to kind of be like the guinea pig child, and then he gets to like benefit from all of my mistakes.